So as is our course, we start with the text, and I choose to title it Happy Are All Who Revere Adonai. And I do pause to acknowledge, usually I translate the word Yireh as who are in awe of Adonai. But I did see in Jewish Publication Society, among other translations, also in the Lev Sidur, the choice of the word revere. I stay away in some ways from the word fear, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end as well. Hence, the choice of the word revere for Yireh. Happy are all who revere Adonai. A song of ascents. Happy are all who revere Adonai, who walk in God's ways. What reaches your palms, such you shall eat. You shall be happy, and it is good for you. Your wife is like a fruitful vine in the far interior of your home. Your children are like olive saplings around your table. Behold, for such a person, be blessed who reveres Adonai. May Adonai bless you from Zion, and may you see the goodness of Jerusalem all the days of your life, and may you see children of your children. Shalom upon Israel. This Psalm 128 is very similar to what we studied yesterday, Psalm 127, in that the key theme is that those who are faithful to God, who revere God, they will be rewarded. But in contrast to yesterday's psalm, here, yesterday, that you had to revere God to get all those rewards, that was implied, not as explicit as here. And yesterday, you remember that's the Shir LeShlomo to Solomon, and there were hints of idolatry, there were hints of the fear of being attacked, hence need for guards, and for going to the gates to deal with your enemy or with disputes. Here, Psalm 128 is idyllic. We don't have any of those tensions. There is no external conflict. There's no hint of any wrongdoing. This is a psalm with the same theme. Happy are all who revere Adonai, that they will be rewarded. And here the reward is that of several kinds. Your home will prosper. You'll have abundance of children. And may you even be blessed to have a long life. With that, we'll start from the beginning and do a more now close analysis of the psalm. Just 1 second. Okay, now let me pull it up again. So the psalm has several different ways that you can understand its composition. And here I rely largely on the literary analysis of Rabbi Benjamin Siegel. First way is to see it in two parts, verses 1 to 3, and then verses 4 to 6. If you look at it that way, there is a focus on the household in verses 1 to 3, and the national on verses 4 to 6. They're also structured in each of those two units with a general statement followed by two direct explanations. And there's a progression in each of those sections from verse 1, Yireh Adonai, verse 2, Tov, good, verse 3, Banim, your children. And you get that same progression in the second half. Yireh Adonai, verse 4, 2, Tov, verse 5, and Banim. So that's one way to understand this psalm. as the focus is on reward, national, and first household, and that they're structured as two units that are in many ways symmetrical. The other way some read the psalm is dividing it with verses 1 to 4 as having the inclusio, the bracketing of fear of God. And then 5 and 6 are national prayers. And once again, when I translate, as in this case, may Adonai bless you, you can also read, because of the imperfect grammatical tense, you can also read it as God will bless you. So rather than a prayer, 5 and 6 could have been read in that first way as not prayer, but as affirmation of reward. The third way to understand the flow is that described by the biblical commentator, the Malbim, in which he says the flow is from the individual to the individual with a household to the individual with nation, so that the flow is an expanding of the idyllic life, which also has a flow of a fruitful wife that leads to children, that leads to grandchildren, that has a closing line, Shalom al Yisrael, as an expression of joy. And as Rabbi Siegel will emphasize, what makes poetry art is that all three can simultaneously be true. So in such a short, compact psalm, there are simultaneous ways of seeing the structure as the balance between, the individual and community, as the movement that has the image of the revering God as the key motif to some closing national prayers, or as a flow of unfolding of life with community. Not unlike the other psalms of ascent, there is the fancy term anadiplosis, which means a lot of repetition of words in the psalm, some of those that I just pointed out, that create that sense of motion and movement. The opening, Ashrei, and Haholech, the combination of happy is the one who walks in God's ways, that is similar to Psalm 1. Ashrei hagever sher lo halach achrei tzat. Happy is the person who is not gone or walked after. And Psalm 119 has that same kind of juxtaposition of happiness equals how you walk, which is also to say that it's not only about revering God as a feeling that matters, to be content, to be happy. It's not only Yirei Adonai, it's Haholech Bidrachav. It's what you do with that sense of reverence. It's the following God's ways that lead you in how you live your life. Now, verse 2 is quoted twice in Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the sages, a Mishnah. It's best known by the statement that I had as part of my introduction of Ben Zoma, Israel's 2nd century, Mi Ashir, who is rich, Hu shesamech bechelko, the one who is happy with his portion. And then it will quote Psalm 2, Yagia kapecha ki tochel, what reaches his hands, so he will eat. Ashrecha v'tov lach, happy are you and good is it for you, which is to imply that whatever you receive, that you're content. Hence, Mi Ashir, who is rich, the one who's fine with what he or she received. It gets quoted again in Pirkei Avot, where Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, chapter 6, paragraph 4, will describe the need for a student to be ascetic, literally eating crusty bread, sleeping on the ground, not pursuing physical needs or pleasures, and being content by simply what you have. And in 6:4, all of verse 2 will be quoted. And so this verse, Yagia kapecha ki tochel, whatever reaches your hand, so you will eat, has another way of being translated, which is how it's widely translated. The word yagia in verse 2 can either be what reaches your hand or your palm, or it can be from the word yagea, same root, which means fatigued. And so this is widely translated as when you eat the labor of your hands. And there's a lot of rabbinic commentary then on verse 2 relating to how labor is part of life, and that you'll be happy when what you have achieved is a result of your labor. So kind of a paradox or tension in the psalm. On one hand, rewards come from God, blessing. But on the other hand, here, what reaches your palms has implicit in it what you have worked to obtain. And therefore, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I'll come back to him later, will teach relating to this verse, and he'll quote Job 5:7, Ki Adam la'amal yulad, for a mortal to labor or even to grieve was born. And he will say in a little letter that he wrote that whether it's acquiring material gains or spiritual rewards, God created a world where our effort matters. And when we have effort and then harvest, that is when we have satisfaction. Now, verse 3, your wife is like a fruitful vine in the far interior of your home. Your children are like olive saplings around your table. Here is the only metaphor in this short psalm, and it's an agricultural metaphor for your, clearly it's being addressed to a man, because it's ishtecha, your wife. So the audience is a man or men, and your wife is like a fruitful vine, children like olive saplings. Most of the Psalms are written by Levites, are written in Jerusalem, not out in the country. But even for those who may have been living in the city, still it's an agricultural civilization. And the metaphors of bounty, of the promised land with those big grapes, as the scouts will bring back to show it's a land flowing with milk and honey, the imagery even for one's own home, even if you're living in the city, is the image of the field. And that too is an image of the partnership with God. As the rabbis teach, all that grows is a result of the gift of sun and seed and soil, gifts from God, and yet requires working the soil, weeding, planting, sowing. And so the image here is also of partnership. On the positive side, a fruitful vine, well, that kind of points toward wine. Samson Raphael Hirsch, the rabbi of Frankfurt of the 19th century in particular, will say that this links to that which will bring joy. A wife, the rabbis teach, is the joy of her husband. That's true. Rashi will emphasize that the fruitful vine, the image of Poriah, is that she will be blessed to be fruitful. Your wife will have many children. And the word yarkide, which I'm going to come back to in a moment, has also as the same root as thighs, yerech. So she will be fruitful with her thighs. That's alluded to in terms of the poetry. But now, I'm going to come back to Bayarki Day, but first let me talk about the sons. Your children will be like olive saplings around your table. Literally, it's stiel can be a plant, so like olive plants. But since the context is your children, hence the translation of saplings. And they're going to be around your table. Olives in that agricultural time were an important part of the economy. It's something you could grow and sell, unlike other things, other than more than subsistence. And in that sense, your children will both be prosperous, like olives, source of wealth. And the thing that's distinctive about an olive tree is it's green all year round. And in that light, they will be, unlike other trees that have seasons, olives endure, live long. So there's a positive description of the family. Your wife like a fruitful vine, your children like olive saplings. But the tension for me, as the reader, is the word yarkite. Yarkite is an unusual word. It means deep within. Sometimes translated, like in the King James Version, in your corners of your house. So it's deep in the interior. And what's disturbing is some of the medieval commentaries explaining this, or even in the Talmud. Namely, the role of the wife was to be indoors and hidden away. You get that in Midrash Tanhuma, which says of a wife, she only displays her beauty to her husband. And I shared in my introduction, Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, Spain, 13th century. She's so modest that only her husband and householder see her. You get that same notion in the Talmud, where a queen is inside the palace. Well, that can be, of course, problematic. The implication that the wife, your wife, who's being addressed, she's not going to want to be in public. She's only going to show her beauty to you. She's going to be so modest. That definition of modesty and a woman's role, for me, in my world, is very troubling. And I shared the image from India of Udaipur of a tour guide describing his Hindu wife and saying that they had been married for 15 years and his wife always wore a veil when anybody came over the house who was not the immediate family. And that included his own father. He said his father had never seen her face in the 15 years they were married or even heard her voice, because a woman would not speak in the presence of an elder. Well, after that, I lost all attraction to veils, even at weddings. I leave it up to my brides, but I don't see it as romantic anymore. I see it as part of traditional cultures, not any one culture, frankly, where women were to be sequestered, both for modesty, but also for sexual propriety. And that, of course, led to much limitation on the possibilities of a woman in the world. I'll come back to that, but that's embedded here in verse 3, this word, this description of a wife who really is being praised for being fertile and being hidden away. Verse 4, behold, for such will a person be blessed who reveres Adonai. And now this closing blessing. May Adonai bless you from Zion. May you see the goodness of Jerusalem all the days of your life. And here again, that reappearing of the word tov, here tuv, often translated as flourishing. And we've seen this image in other Psalms, that Jerusalem here, directly Rashi will comment, is the gateway to heaven, that blessings flow from the world above, Yerushalayim shel Mala, heavenly Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim shel Mata, earthly Jerusalem, and from there, the navel of the world, the blessings are dispersed. Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, will say, why is it being blessed from Zion? Because Zion is the location of God's Holy Spirit. Radak will likely say that when it says, may you see children of your children, that's referring messianically to the harvesting of the dispersed nation of Israel, kibbutz galuyot. Again, the Psalms of Ascent, all 15, are often read in the medieval period in particular as words often attributed to King David, prophetically describing the messianic future. And you have the close, Shalom al Yisrael. We saw that a few Psalms ago, Psalm 125, its last verse as well. May there be wholeness, peace, tranquility upon Israel. And that too can have messianic implications. And so here, because I keep one eye on the clock, is where there are no coincidences in terms of a midrash that has particular resonance as I prepare. This is from the very beginning. Who is the subject? Happy are all who revere Adonai. Listen to what early rabbis of Israel, who are the voices of the midrash in Midrash Rabbah, the great midrash, because it's a large collection of these teachings of the early rabbis. And specifically, here's the teaching of Bamidbar Rabbah 8:10, who is being spoken about in verse 1. Quote, specifically, this refers to God-fearing converts who joined the ranks of Israel in exile. Sometimes a convert feels insignificant and questions the value of his or her accomplishments, saying, since I lack zchut avot, the merit of ancestors, which accrues to the born Jew, how can I expect a portion in the world to come? And so this psalm is addressed to that convert who says, I'm a God-fearer, I revere God, but I don't have the merit of my ancestors. The Holy One, blessed is He. And this is, by the way, quoted in the Art Scroll commentary for this psalm. And one reason I came to my office is I couldn't get it off of Safari. It wasn't downloading fast enough. So I continue to read from the Art Scroll. The Holy One, blessed is He, reassures the convert in the following verses. When you eat the labor of your own hands, you are rewarded for your own accomplishments, not for those of your parents. If you labor, you are praiseworthy in this world, and all is well with you in the world to come. And here's a little bit relating to verse 3, less comfortable with. Moreover, even if two converts marry, they have the opportunity to begin their own family and to create an illustrious line of Jewish descendants. Therefore, the psalmist says, your wife shall be like a fruitful vine in your inner chambers of your home, your children like olive shoots around your table. And one last comment from, again, Bamidbar Rabbah in that same place of 8:10. Will be commenting on verse 6. May you see children of your children. Here's the comment. May you be blessed with long life. No. The psalmist foretells the fortune of the pious convert. And may you see children to your children who will be priests. For the Midrash interprets this entire psalm as a promise to sincere converts, Although they abandon their heathen, this is Art Scroll, although they abandon their heathen ancestors and forget their past, these converts may look to a glorious future for their descendants. For the daughter of a convert may even marry a Kohen, and the son born from this union will be a priest who blesses Israel with the benediction, V'yasem lecha shalom, the priestly blessing of 626, which is alluded to here. And then I'll pull this together. The beginning of verse 5, Yevarechecha Adonai, which is the opening of the priestly blessing of Numbers 6:24. And of course, it ends with Shalom, that priestly blessing of verse 6. And so one lens that this entire psalm was read is, who is the happy who revere Adonai? Who is this addressing? It's converts. And in this reading of the early centuries of Israel, a few things to know. One, converts were seen as part of community. There were converts from the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism, and they were seen as worthy of both being blessed and having a psalm to describe that what they do with their own choices, with their own hands, will be the source of their reward. They don't need to depend on this classic notion of the rewards of one's ancestors, that God will reward them with children, and their children will create Jewish families. And even though a convert in the Torah, as understood by the rabbis, could not marry a priest, their children, their grandchildren can be such priests, and they can be a source of blessing for Israel. Now, I have 2 minutes left, and I'll add that it really resonated with me because my friend Rabbi Greenwald sent me an article from the Jerusalem Post of the last week or two by my neighbor and friend, Rabbi David Elezri, who in very strong terms as a Chabad rabbi explains why he rejects non-Orthodox converts as inauthentic conversions. And I continue to tweak, and Rabbi Adam helped me with some of that tweaking and others, a rebuttal as to why my convert should feel fully and authentically Jewish. I will add, if Midrash Rabbah celebrates the convert, starting in the 13th century, with the Zohar in particular, there's a distinction made between souls, if you will, a caste system of souls. Only Jews have a divine soul. Non-Jews have an animal soul. And that is part of the Zohar. The world was created only for those with divine souls, not for those in the Zohar with animal souls. It's one of the things of the Zohar that so troubled me in my journey through the Zohar. And it would inform Chassidut, it would inform the Tanya, the foundational work of Chabad. And the Rebbe would say to his shluchim, to his representatives like Rabbi Elezri, we do not do conversion. We invite non-Jews to fulfill the 7 laws of Noah, but not to convert them. And he did not give a reason. Some have said, and that perhaps, some have said it more than perhaps, who've studied the matter, that it's rooted in this caste system of souls. I reject the caste system of souls as unfounded in the world in which I see the world, and as repugnant to being each created in the image of God. And so, toward that end, those who choose to convert with my dear teacher and friend, Rabbi Greenwald, are converting to an authentic form of Judaism. A form of Judaism that sees how a woman is related to, in verse 3, biyarkite, not only confined to the interior, the far interior of her home, but being counted in the minyan. A Judaism that sees every person as created in the image of God, fully equal, spiritually. And that is a choice, Not all Orthodox accept that definition of soul. It is mainstream in Chabad. And again, it's not made up by Chabad, but it is taking an idea of Spain of the 13th century when Jews were oppressed, in which everybody said they had the truth, the only truth, and applying it in our day, I find to be not my form of understanding the nature of God and God's goodness and God's desire for men and women to fulfill that spiritual spark of the divine in him or her. So with that, I get to look at my friend Rabbi Greenwald and all of you to see what reactions you might have to Psalm 128. Rabbi Adam, do you want to say anything first? I see Irene's hand up as well, but you're our honoree. I delight in both sharing what we do with Psalms here already at Psalm 128. We've been at it for over a year. About this particular Psalm, do you want to speak first or last?
I'll share something now. First of all, to thank you, Rabbi Spitz, for inviting me to be here for this wonderful and learned presentation. It's good to see friends and to see people who have studied with me in the past and who are studying with me now, who are now also your students, Rabbi Spitz. So that's a delight. Just one observation that I was noticing in the second and third verse. Would you mind throwing it back up on the screen?
Sure.
That the second and third verse invokes this idea of being blessed by what reaches one's palms, by the fruitful vine that is one's spouse, and by the olive saplings that are one's children. And I was thinking about those three images together and thinking interestingly that while they're being used here as symbols of being blessed, all three of these, palms, vine, and olive, are vehicles of blessing in the other direction. When the rabbinic sources want to speak about the Kohanim, the priests blessing the people, they use the phrase nesiat kapayim, the lifting up of palms, in some ways the mirror of yigia kapecha, the receiving of palms. So when the priests are blessing, they are lifting up their palms as a way of beaming out blessing to the congregation. And of course, wine and oil are both vehicles by which blessing takes place. The fruit of the vine is what we use for Kiddush, to sanctify the Shabbat and holiday table. Oil was the vehicle of anointing to mark a new king of our people. And so there's something interesting to me, just in first glance, of the way in which this psalm perhaps is playing with these symbols of vehicles of blessing, that those who are Yirei Adonai will be blessed, but also perhaps that they can be sources of blessing. And in the connection that the Midrash makes with converts, I'll share that one of my favorite questions to ask in a Beit Din, usually toward the end, is to say, we have heard in the course of this conversation all of the ways in which you feel blessed by your participation in the Jewish community, and it's always quite wonderful to hear those reflections. And I will ask, how is the Jewish community being blessed by your presence? How do we tonight go to bed richer than we were the day before because you are now a part of us? And so there's always a celebration in a Beit Din of the way in which the newcomer to the Jewish community is being blessed by Judaism and is also a vehicle for extending blessing in Judaism. And I think that that interplay perhaps is hinted at in those two verses.
That is just beautiful. And, you know, it is a insight of the play of the language that I haven't seen in any other commentaries, which is to say, that is the gift of both text and a learned eye in reading text. I love what you just shared in terms of Yagia Kapecha, what receives in your palms. That's the same image of blessing. And verses 2 and 5 in that sense become bracketed, because verses 5 and 6 are the priestly blessings. Yevarechecha Adonai ... shalom. And so that 2 and 5, 2 and 6 are kind of mirroring. And I love your mirroring with your candidates to join the Jewish people. That again, it's not only what you receive, and you begin with acknowledging what you receive and then what you can give. And I'll just add a little underscore to the order of love, to the order of belonging. It's acknowledging what you received and then what you can give back with the gratitude of what you've received. Thank you, Adam. I saw one, I saw Irene put up her hand. Go ahead, Irene, and Mimi. I'll take Irene and Mimi, and then I'll pull it together. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that today, the news from Israel is that the very first woman to become an Orthodox rabbi on her own back, so to speak, without being assistant, has been appointed by Midreshet Lindenbaum, where I studied. So it shows that even in Israel, which has a problem with some of the chief rabbinates. Secondly, you're right about Chabad. And one of the problems is that they also attack people who are vegetarian for the same reason, that because our souls are supposed to be superior, we are doing something good for the animals by eating them, and they will attack people that are vegetarian. And there's, you know, I've actually had to translate stuff on that. But thirdly, I cannot understand how a group of people that are going to celebrate Shavuot with the Book of Ruth can say that about conversion, because many people think she was the greatest Jewish woman of all time and she was a convert. So, you know, I'm just trying to reinforce what you just said. I've got a bit of trepidation because, as you know, I'm not from the conservative tradition. There isn't a very big one. There's none in my city. But as you know, I feel very blessed to have been allowed to come into your group and learn such a lot from your Psalms. But I do feel that the Middle Ages, because the Christians hated the Jews so much, and some still do, the Jews were fighting back with this whole point about the souls. And of course, being in Europe myself, I'm aware all the time that this sort of thing is being said by other religions, putting us down the whole time, doesn't get into the news all the time, you know, no excuse, but it's an explanation. So it's those three things.
So let me add a few thoughts and reaction. First, with the last one. In the Middle Ages, the church described the Jews as the devil. And they did so widely, the papacy, because they said, you know, if Jesus preached among the Jews and the Jews rejected the Lord, who they met, they were the privileged people to meet him, then they must be other than human. And so the degradation of Jews as other than human was embedded in medieval culture. There are books written, of course, on that topic. And Jews, you know, it only really arose, this whole notion of superiority of Jews on the soul level, in Yehuda Halevi's Kuzari in Spain, just before the Zohar, and then would take on wings with the Zohar because it was there and so widely well received. In regard, Irene, to the celebration of the first rabbah, the first woman rabbi being given that notice, the place where you studied, Irene, is in Efrat, I understand. It's not? Where is it located? Oh, no, no?
Sorry, she's in Efrat because it's, I studied before Rabbi Riskin came to Israel. I studied, I'm so old. I studied before, it wasn't the same setup.
Okay.
And I studied with Aviva Sornberg, who's a great teacher, and the person you want to meet, Rabbi Cardozo, when you go on your retirement, and the other yeshiva that was Haredi. I didn't even know what that meant in those days. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is pretty awful. I didn't know till I met you that Chabad actually don't take converts. And I do think some of their behavior is a bit peculiar. from
Yeah.
many points of view, but with so many vegetarians around, to attack vegetarians for actually depriving animals of our, I mean, I'm not vegetarian myself, I nearly am, but I think it's shocking and we have to do something about it.
So
And
the
yeah,
one
sorry.
point that I was looking to make is that the woman, the Rabbah, is in Efrat, and that's a community that, as you mentioned, Irene, that took on a new life with Rabbi Shlomo Riskin from New York, a kind of Anglo modern orthodoxy that empowered women in so many ways. And so I underscore your bringing that to the foreground. I'm so grateful that you did, Irene, in terms of even within Orthodoxy, there is change of women's role as teachers. But again, within Orthodoxy, that's a very big box. There are those who see it as sacrilege. I can stand and talk with a woman in the courtyard of the Kotel, but if the two of us open a prayer book together and start to pray side by side, that will be viewed by some as sacrilege, and it will be dealt with in vile ways. So lots of problems there. Thank you, Irene. Mimi, you get the last word, and I'll pull it together.
In verse 3, your wife in the far interior of your home.
Yes.
When I read that without reading your commentary first, I was thinking of the couple as that their souls are together, that it's an extremely deep relationship between the members of the between those two people.
And as my friend and teacher Ahuva Ho has taught me, all these different interpretations are true. And so I will underscore it first on the pshat as well. The pshat, the surface is kitchens in ancient times, because of all the smoke, were far inside at times, away from where people would be living, away from the living quarters. So in that sense, it was often off in a corner, which is one way that Yarkite is understood, or far in the interior. So on the pshat, it may not have said something about the woman being pushed aside, not to come out, though that's where the commentaries will also take it. I have not seen your commentary, but it is authentically beautiful, which is when it says your wife is like a fruitful vine in the far interior of your home, that means deeply embedded within your sense, because the other word used for a wife is she is your home. You get the rabbis in the Talmud using home and wife interchangeably. And so beautifully said, Mimi, that simultaneously can resonate with us who take these words as words for us, which is true for all of Torah, to read it in a way knowing that there are layers and possibilities of interpretation, and yet something remarkably sacred in the words themselves that allow for the possibility of still making those words resonant, uplifting in our own lives. So with Psalm 128, we celebrate that happy are all who revere Adonai. I have one I'll stop for today. I can't help myself. Here's a Facebook post from this morning. One closing Facebook post from this morning with which to close. I have a friend who lives on Hanaton. His name is Jacob Ner David. He was a venture capitalist. Long story, he wound up living on the conservative movement Moshav, although he grew up Orthodox in New York. And he writes on Facebook this morning, he entitles it, May It Be Your Will. Planting a new vineyard is a leap of faith. You don't know how the land will react to the vines you want to bring, or how in 3 to 5 years the first wine you make will develop. But you believe in yourself, in your team, in God. He puts in parentheses, whatever God means for you. So as we get ready to plant a new vineyard for Jezreel, the name of his wine label, we pray that God will guide our hands, our choice of varieties, growing style, winemaking decisions, and in a few short years, we will literally taste our faith. So there's an unknown in life with the promise of reward to those who are faithful to God. May we so be faithful